Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another Astral interview. And here with me, I have George Sewell and Dan Baldwin. And they've co-authored a book called Paranormal Pendulum 3. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves first before we learn what Paranormal Pendulum 3 is and what preceded it. So let's start with George. And maybe George, you want to introduce yourself? And
Well, I'm George Sewell, lifelong resident of Shreveport and Bossier City, Louisiana, and I've always had an interest in things astronomical, outer space, discovery, the paranormal, the whole gamut.
right.
So I've had an entire lifetime to look at those subjects, read the literature on the subjects, and in many instances, actually, I have some encounters and experiences.
Okay.
And vocationally, I was a counselor, and that was of great benefit for years there in the late 1980s and early 1990s when I was the assistant state director for Louisiana for the Mutual UFO Network, and had an opportunity to converse with a number of people who had had various encounters in Northwest Louisiana. And Dan was living in Shreveport at the time, and very often we both would go out to listen to these people's story. And that's mainly what they wanted, just somebody they could talk to.
Absolutely.
That could be confidential. They weren't looking for some sort of explanation as to it was or what happened, although that would be nice, but mainly just to have a confidential ear so they can get it off their chest. And
Right.
I found great value in being able to do that. I also picked up that for many of these people, they interpreted the encounter, whatever it may have been, as personal to them.
Right.
And during the course of our investigations for Paranormal Pendulum Book 3, The Abduction of Lindsay Higgins, I had an opportunity to get a full taste of what they meant by that. So it's been a fun road.
Thank you. Thank you for that brief introduction. And Dan, tell us about yourself and tell us how George joined you in co-authoring your Paranormal Pendulum 3.
There you go. Yeah, I'm a full-time writer. I'm used to live in Shreveport, Louisiana. Was George's neighbor, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
I'm in Mesa, Arizona right now. I'm a full-time writer. I do novels. I'm also a ghost writer who turned into a ghost writer. Yeah, my psychic friends love my business card when it says ghost writer on it. But about 20 years ago, I got involved in using pendulum dowsing for looking for missing children.
Okay.
And yeah, I co-founded an international group of psychics who did that, and I was with them for about 20 years. And through that, I met some friends, and we began investigating. They were mediums, and we had the idea one day of let's combine your medium abilities with my pendulum dowsing and see how that works with making spirit communication.
Okay.
And by golly, it worked. And beyond that, when you're contacting with spirits traditionally, you're hoping for maybe a word or a phrase that you can record, an EVP, or maybe
Right.
a knock or a brief feeling. We discovered that you can, in making spirit contact, you can have extended conversations.
Wow.
With the spirits. I mean, you're not waiting for a yes or a no or a help or a hi,
Right.
something like that. You can,
Right.
I'm talking legitimate back and forth conversations. It's a bit slow because of the pendulum process is a bit tedious, but it's very
Right.
effective. So from that, I started investigating, more of the spirit world, and then George, bless his heart, dragged me into a situation. He can tell you how it happened, but I've always been interested in UFOs, and like George said,
Yeah.
I used to go out with him when he was with MUFON, and he had a case in Shreveport, and he said, "Well, I've been helping." George says this: "I've been helping you with your spirit research. Why don't we try this with the UFO case that I'm working with?" And by golly, that worked too. And out of that came Paranormal Pendulum 3, an abduction case that
Okay.
went way beyond abduction. Yeah, way.
Okay. So, from my background of working with pendulums, basically we have a little grid. You have yes and no on the grid. Maybe you have some letters on the grid. You work with the pendulum. maybe it's a rock on a string, maybe it's a chain, maybe it's a crystal, but and mostly used for muscle testing. And in the ancient history, we know it was used for finding water and metal sources, etc. But now, how do you apply this to what you're talking about? Like, what was your first discovery when you discovered that you could do this? How did that come about exactly?
Yeah, basically it's you just ask. The first time that we actually tried it, we went to a ghost town in Arizona, Cortland, and there's an old jail cell there. And my associates and I sat down and said, well, and we recorded it, video and audio, and we started working. And sure enough, we made contact with the spirit, and I started getting yes and no answers to the questions, and the spirits were getting the same answers, through their mediumship. And it's basically you conducting a conversation like you and I are having a conversation right now. The only slowdown is you have to wait for this to give a response one way or the other.
Right.
But it's a traditional conversation. I'm just waiting, are we on the air, or are we being pre-recorded? I get a yes. Are we in black and white? I get a no. And you just carry on a normal conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then when you were at that jail cell, how did you corroborate that the questions you were asking and the answers you were getting were accurate? Like, how did you know for sure that you were actually communicating?
Well, yes, you're communicating because you're getting the answers. And again, you have I had the backup of two mediums who were getting the same answers.
Same answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of times you don't know. I mean, you've got to go with your gut feeling, but you just know that you're making contact. In the case with Paranormal Pendulum 3, George and I would do our research, and then later on we would get corroboration by talking with people. Or George is great on newspaper research. We would discover information that backed up what we found in the historical record. In this book, we also worked very closely with one of the local museums, and they were able to dig up information. So we would come up with a name or a place or a date, and the guy would look at it. Oh yeah, there it is, right there.
Yeah, and also we had working with us a couple of evidential mediums, and one of Dan's colleagues is also a pendulum dowser. So if we have a line of questioning that we want to verify, if you will, to have it suitable to put in the book, we might have Dave hold the pendulum, and then we will repeat the questions that we had at a previous session and see how Dave's pendulum responds. And it responds spot on every time. And very often our mediums would be getting information coming in from the same source, just in a different fashion, and it corroborated the general trend that we were in. So they were very, very careful to double check all the information, because some of it was not what one would expect in this kind of investigation.
Yeah, let me toss in one of the techniques that we used.
Sure.
For example, George is pretty good pendulum dowser too.
Right.
So in order so that I wouldn't see his pendulum move or he wouldn't see my pendulum move, we would sit back to back, so that neither one of us could be influenced, even subconsciously, by the other one's movement. And when we were working with mediums, the medium would face away from both of us. So and then we'd have somebody monitoring. So you would have three people working on the same question, and we couldn't see the medium, we couldn't see her body language to be influenced by that. Head nodding up and down or back and forth, and she couldn't see the pendulum movement, yes or no. And consistently, we all three would get the same answer over and over and over again.
Wow. So when you say consistently, how many cases would we be talking about?
Well, in the Paranormal Pendulum 3 is one case. It's
one case.
The Paranormal Pendulum book 1, covers I don't know how many cases. I just wrote that as a how-to book. How you can use the pendulum to make contact. The book 2 is 400 pages of what I learned in that experience. And George and I, was George's primary the primary researcher in that book. And God, I don't know how many cases we looked in there.
Wow.
Uncounted,
He's
but I
easily
know
dozens.
at least
Wow.
dozens. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, over several years. That took a long time.
so George, why don't you share the story of this UFO encounter and this abduction and what and the details behind that a little bit?
Yeah, it's quite the tale. Again, the subject is a Shreveport woman, Lindsay Higgins,
Okay.
and she has a lifetime of active paranormal involvement, and apparently a lifetime of I hate to say abduction because that's not exactly accurate,
Right.
but involvement with what we would call extraterrestrials.
Okay.
And as is so often the case with such a person, who are you going to talk to? You know, if the family's not
Yeah.
going to buy it, or in Lindsay's case, when she was very young, like say 9 or 10, she was having severe abdominal pains, and reached a point to where her family basically put her in the hospital for a couple of days just to run a full battery of tests to find out what would be
What was going
cause of
on?
pain. And
Right.
at the end of the day, there was no diagnosis. There was
Right.
nothing diagnosable to account for her distress. And the physicians just kind of concluded at the time that, well, since her mother had cancer, was dying, that she was doing this for attention. Of course, that's ludicrous. But that kind of gives you an idea of things are clearly happening to Lindsay that are not being addressed by, if you will, the adults in the room or the other parties. But she reached a point in her 40s when she just, I can't sit on this anymore. I just cannot. I'm going to burst if I continue to hold all this in. There are just very few friends who knew anything about it. And
So wait, she was having abdominal pain at age 9. That's a physical experience she was
yes, it
having.
is.
But then was she having other experiences as well? Like, or she was keeping them to herself and basically we don't find out anything till she's 40.
Pretty much to herself. There was maybe 1 or 2 friends that she could confide in, and one of those was key in our making an acquaintance. But essentially, she reached that decision, and for whatever reason, she had turned into a podcast on things paranormal, and they had an announcement that a Los Angeles-based production company was looking for people who had true lifelong paranormal histories for possible production and inclusion in an upcoming Netflix series. And that just struck Lindsay as that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. So she wrote up her story and hit the send button. Out it went to Los Angeles. And within 14 hours, she's on with the production company, setting up a formal Skype interview for the next day. What happens the next day? She's informed we're going to do it. Then they ask, do you know anybody else in Shreveport area who has had similar experience or knows about them? And that's what prompted her to contact a mutual friend of ours. Okay. This particular friend had an interest in all things paranormal and she knew a little bit about Lindsay's history, and she was aware of my background. So she said, Lindsay, you need to call George Sewell. Okay, you can talk to him. And a couple of nights later, my phone goes off in the middle of the night, and well, not middle of the night, maybe 9 p.m. or something like that. And normally I don't answer the house phone because it's 99% junk calls. But I had a hunch that I might want to take this one. So I did. And so it's, hello, is this George? Yes. Well, this is Lindsay Higgins. Joe Beth Baggett said I could call you and we could talk. And I'm thinking, okay, what should we talk about? And for the next 2 hours, she described pretty much her lifetime of experiences, beginning when she was roughly 2.5, maybe 3 years old, with a memory, not a story she's been told, but her actual memory of an event, all the way up to the current day. And because I had a number of cases in my files from a couple of decades earlier, pretty much everything she described to me, every encounter, every event, I had heard it before, something very, very similar for other people. And that was very reassuring for Lindsay. So we maintained communication, and turned out the production company contacted me and wanted me to come on out and sit in on the as well. And that's where Lindsay and I first met in person, was on location near Pasadena, California, for the filming of what turned into in Netflix's series Haunted in the first season. And it was episode 5, the Lindsay story. And it was quite the presentation. They did a nice job recreating some of the confusion and distress that young Lindsay encountered. But the money shot, so to speak, is they recreated very well, according to Lindsay, an event that occurred when she was a sophomore in college, where she was in her room in her house. Her father owned the house, so she just lived in the house. She was in her room doing some schoolwork, procrastinating as expected. So it's getting kind of late. And so, okay, so that's enough of that. So she lays down and goes to sleep. And all of a sudden, a bright light just bursts through the window on the south side of her bedroom and just kind of takes over. And then, as she described it, the wall began to dissolve. And she could see through the wall and actually see the craft out behind. And that's when the light actually grabbed hold of her, raised her up, and started tracking her out of the room. Now, there was a ceiling fan in the room, and she grabbed a hold of the blades of the ceiling fan until it just jerked her, and boom, out she went, and off she went. And she doesn't know exactly how long it was before she was returned. It's ranged from 20 minutes to 2 hours. There's really no way to know. But when she was back in the room, she realized that something pretty profound had happened. So she got out a stepladder and went up to the ceiling fan. And on the top side of the fan blades in the dust, you could see the marks of her fingers scratching.
Wow.
So that told her, yeah, this was
that told her that it really happened.
Yes. Yeah. And so after the Netflix series aired, she heard from a lot of people around the country who saw the episode and were so relieved that she had told her story, and they were able to talk to Lindsay in many cases, or even other people, just to get it off, just out as Lindsay did. So that was Lindsay's secondary purpose for coming clean with her experiences, as to provide others that you can do this.
Yeah.
You can do this.
Yeah. Many people I've interviewed which have had experiences, it's always about the reason they want to be interviewed is so that other people can know that they had this experience. And if anyone else has had this experience, it can help them.
Well, that's one of the reasons, one of the prime reasons behind the book is we hope people out there, and I'm sure there's some in your audience tonight who have had this experience and who are holding back. And we're trying to say, don't hold back. You're not alone. There are people, and there are a lot of people undergoing or who have undergone the same experience that's affecting you. And there's help out there. There are people who want to listen. So if you've got a story to tell, by all means, please tell it. There are people willing to listen.
Thank you for saying that, because there is a lot of people who are not. They may go ahead with the interview, but they're not willing to share it. And so then there's a record of it, but then nobody wants to share it for fear of being ridiculed, basically, right?
Well, it's a lot different now than it was 20, 30 years ago. That's for sure.
True. This is absolutely
much
true.
greater awareness these days of all things, speaking, but in that arena specific.
Yeah, the problem there is just you've got decades and decades of prejudice to overcome. But finally, like George said, there are breakthroughs, and there are very significant breakthroughs. So there's no reason to hold back right now.
Right. So tell me a little bit about what you feel that your book is going to do for the community of people out there who are having these experiences. How can it help them?
Well, some of the feedback that we're beginning to get is in the course of, we spent 2 years investigating the abduction of Lindsay Higgins, us and the other people I mentioned. And we would just go with the information. We didn't have any preconceived direction for this investigation to go. So we just kind of went where the evidence took us, and it took us to some really interesting places. So that not only did we affirm, to my satisfaction, that yes, these were real experiences, some physical, some more astral, and they have been occurring all through Lindsay's life. We learned that actually this has been something that's been going on for a long time, thousands of years, that Lindsay has been participating voluntarily in a long-term project. Somehow it was needed, her participation, because of her ability to reincarnate as a Homo sapien, that physical element seemed to be something that was necessary in this project. And when we were looking at that angle, that's when we discovered that Lindsay, her father, and her sister are in the same relationships in this lifetime as they had in their previous lifetime as another family in Shreveport, Louisiana, that Dan and I were led to by spirit, if you will, to come across the W.D. Woodworth family and learn about them and communicate with certainly W.D. and his daughter Sally Murph with the pendulum. And that's where we were able to realize that, okay, there's something really consistent here. It's family-based. And there was a session, a pendulum session that Dan and I had with Lee, and she was very much wanting to talk to her former incarnation, Sally Murph Woodworth. So here we are, we're conversing with Lindsay. She's asking a question to Sally Murph, and Sally Murph is responding via the pendulum. So we're talking to two splits of Lindsay physical, Lindsay spiritual, with a memory of a previous lifetime. And that kind of told us that this whole thing is a lot deeper, stacking, than we would initially think. And it just.
So how did you know to communicate with the past incarnation of Lindsay? Like, how did that come about?
That came about when I kind of had a hunch, a lot of hunches here that proved to be, of course, validated, that if Lindsay was attached to the Woodworth family in this incarnation, this would have been the late 19th century and very early 20th century, that she probably was W.D. Woodworth's spouse, wife, Eugenia Woodworth. And we were having a pendulum session at the Spring Street Museum in Shreveport. Dan mentioned they have a lot of historical records that supported a lot of what we were getting pendulum-wise. And we were upstairs and we were having a session with one of the founders of the building, whose spirits shows up frequently. Anybody who spends any time in that building, they're going to meet one of the spirits. And very, very pleasant fellows, eager to talk. Gosh, they love to talk. This particular spirit was acquainted with the W.D. Woodworth family in the past. So asking him for a description of W.D.'s wife, things, color of hair, how she dressed, did she have any musical talents, things I could take and give to Lindsay to see if that would spark, some memory or some kind of reaction to support or negate. When I mentioned that was what I was going to do, she kind of countered with, well, that could be the case, but if I was part of the family, I feel I was a daughter. Okay. But in the course of the session there, wrapped it up, and Dan and I went back to the house and replayed the recording just to make sure that we got everything on there. And as it's playing back, all of a sudden, there was a very distinct, firm male voice interrupting the conversation, saying, "Lindsay is key." And whoa, hello, that's an EVP, a very powerful EVP. Dan and I replayed it a half dozen times. It's on there.
Right.
And say, whoa, okay, so somebody wants us to know that Lindsay is key.
Right.
And as it turned out, we had a session with W.D. Woodworth. He also likes to talk. He's quite a character. A lot of newspaper accounts of W.D.'s antics back in the day. And he confessed to putting that into that conversation. That was W.D. demonstrating some of the things they can do on that side.
And you guys were communicating with him through the pendulum, basically.
Through the pendulum, yeah, that
Back
particular
and forth.
session, we were.
And so it was basically yes or no responses, or?
The pendulum's always yes or no. We have to be very careful on how we phrase the question, so
Right.
that the answer we will get will be accurate. But we asked did WD create this EVP? Yes. And what was really curious is several weeks later, when Dan is back in Arizona and he's working on the transcript of that session, there is no EVP.
Right.
And at a later session, we were speaking with WD and we asked, did you move that statement? Yes. And again, just a demonstration of some of the things they can do from that side. We had a number of those during the 2 years. Well, I could talk all day about some of the things. Yeah.
I
could listen all day about this, but wow.
Yeah, one
Okay.
of the things we found most interesting about this case, and we did not expect that, was that the abduction. We thought we were doing a very basic abduction case,
Right.
which it was. But the more we got into it, the more complex the thing got. It involves not only abduction and contact, it also involves reincarnation. It also involves direct contact with the spirit world. And it also involves contact with, for lack of a better term, higher evolved beings on a higher spiritual plane. So it got really intense in there.
Okay.
And
And so this
just to answer your question,
reincarnation thing sounds interesting to me, where you say 1,000 years of
6,000 years.
6,000 years.
Yeah.
And so the same beings have been communicating with different incarnations of Lindsay for 6,000 years.
What we came up with, again, using the multi-check system that I described earlier, was that approximately 6,000 years ago, Lindsay in spirit had a conversation with the spirit we call ET, who was the manager of this project, as best we can determine. And he invited Lindsay to participate in this long-term, I'll use the word project, and she agreed to do so. And that's where we got the time frame of about 6,000 years ago. It was 1,000 years ago, more than 1,000 years ago, yes, 2,000. And just 6,000 is where that was the stopping point. That's when the conversation or the agreement was made. So that's
right.
Recorded.
And so then what did the project entail?
As best we can determine, and again, it's still ongoing, but at least two significant components appear to be extending the average lifetime of Homo sapiens to basically 150 to 200 years, and to significantly reawaken the sixth sense that was once so prominent with human beings way back when, and for whatever reasons it was closed off or narrowed. But that's part of the process. So imagine Earth if everyone lived 150 to 200 years and had immediate, easy, ongoing communication with the other frequencies. What a world that would be.
That would be beautiful, for sure. And so then, Dan, your books before this, like this is a very different, a book with very different content than you've previously written. And so do you want to talk a little bit about your previous books?
Well, yeah, it started out with a book called the Practical Pendulum. I just wanted to write a basic how-to, none of what you would call woo-woo in it, just a basic, this is what the thing is. It's a rock on a string, it's a tool. This is how you use it. This is what you can do with it. I wrote it as briefly and as simple as I can, just so anybody can pick it up. And the good thing about a pendulum dowsing anyway, is you can pick it up, in a minute. The technique itself. The hard part is comes with practice. And that's like anything else.
Just
The more you do it,
clearing
yeah,
your mind so that
you
you
got
can
to keep your
receive.
mind absolutely clear, because
Yeah,
if you think the answer is yes, you're going to get a yes. If you think no, yeah, you're going to get a no. So you have to keep your mind clear and let your subconscious direct the motion of the fingers. After that, I wrote a couple of books about looking for missing persons. The best one is They Are Not Yet Lost. It's a book about, again, using psychic abilities to find missing persons, mostly kids. And I think I'm in about half of the cases. And some are small, and some of them reach national news.
right.
After that, I wrote a book called the Psychic Detective Guidebook. It's for people who think they would like to become a psychic detective or would like to work with a group. And that's all about how you work with a group, how you work with the police authorities, the local officials, what to do,
Right.
what not to do, things like that.
Right.
And I wrote with two friends of mine. I wrote two books on ghost towns and ghost ranches and ghost mines in the Southwest. Conversations with spirits of the old Southwest and speaking with spirits of the old Southwest. And from that, I wrote the Paranormal Pendulum book 1, 2, and now with George 3.
Right.
So,
And so the spirits of the Southwest, now you communicated with them using a pendulum, is that correct?
yeah. My friends were Dwight and Rhonda Hull. They were mediums, and then I would use the pendulum, and we would work together on it. We would go again to a haunted house or to a haunted ranch or to a haunted building or a haunted site, and just do basic research. And
So then
interview whoever was there.
what does that entail when you actually get to a site? Do you have a set procedure that you follow, or to?
Yeah, it's extremely basic. In all my work and with the work with George, we try to keep it as simple as possible. And you go to a location, and you basically sit down and just turn on the recorders if you got recorders, and then I say, are there any spirits here who wish to communicate? And always there's a yes. And then you just do a little bit of research to find out who is there. Are we speaking with a male? Are we speaking with a female? Are we speaking with someone who was here in 1883?
Right.
And that sort of thing. And then you just start asking questions. It's a very simple process. One of the things I'd like to point out that spirits, for the most part, there are exceptions, but for the most part, the spirits in a haunted house aren't trapped in the haunted house. They're there because you were there to experience
Right.
conversation with the spirit. In other words, they show up.
Right.
They're
So
not trapped there.
So this idea of there being trapped spirits in this
There are
world,
some, and
there are some.
freeing them is a very emotional experience.
Right.
I can relate one if you want.
Please.
Okay. I was involved with group again, my friends, and did an annual event for fundraising for wounded warriors. All the proceeds to the event went to wounded warriors. And what we would do, we would collect people who were interested in psychic experience and give them psychic experiences. And we'd go to haunted places in Arizona. And one of the places we went to was a place in Tombstone, Arizona. That's a modern building, but set on the site of a building that had been it was in Hot Town, the Chinese part of Tombstone back in the day, back in the 1880s. And on that site, it had been a hardware store, a bordello, and probably an opium den all at the same time. And at the time, there had been a murder back in the 1880s. One Chinese man killed another Chinese man. So we went to that thing as the final showcase of the evening. We spent the whole weekend taking people around. I did my lectures, and we guided people to haunted places. And this was kind of a play night almost. And our guest was Brian Cano. I'm sure you're probably familiar with Brian,
Right.
very well-known psychic. And we were all exhausted, the three of us, just from the workload. And we said,
Right.
Brian, this is yours. They're going to play psychic. So the place is set up like an old-fashioned saloon. So to recreate that, we had out bottles of whiskey that were empty, shot glasses, cards, poker chips, some people were wearing play guns and cowboy hats, and we said, just go play psychic and see what happens. They were trying to recreate the atmosphere. And at one point, a woman who had taken my pendulum class that day was working with the pendulum, and she was saying, well, I think I've got something here. And so Brian came over and he was working with her and said, yeah, she's making some kind of contact. And, bless her heart, the woman that was she'd been a pendulum dowser for about 4 hours. She was kind of out of her league, but she was trying real hard. And Brian, said,
Those are experience.
yeah, he called Dwight over and said, something going on here. What do you feel? Yeah, there's definitely something going on. So they said, well, let's get Dan. So I was back in the back, doing this number, what?
Which he does very well.
Yeah. So I hopped down and I said, yeah, I didn't have my pendulum. So I asked one of the ladies for one of her necklaces. Had a nice weight on the string. And that proves the fact that there's nothing mystical about the pendulum itself. It's a rock on a string. Because she gave me her necklace, and that was, that was my pendulum. So yeah, we got something here. So this is pretty serious. And so I called my friend Rondo, who's a really good medium, and we started working with this individual. He was a Chinese man. He had been murdered back in the 1880s. So he had committed a murder back in the 1880s at that spot. And
Wow.
He had killed his brother. And his brother, crossed over. He was afraid to cross over because of the punishment or the torment that he was
Judgment or whatever.
terrified. Yeah, terrified. And we were trying to convince him to, it's okay. You can cross over. You'll be all right. Whatever you're afraid of is not going to happen to you. And he was very resistant. And you're getting this not only from the pendulum, but from the two mediums. And then another spirit joined us. It was his brother, the man he had murdered. So all of a sudden you had two mediums, a pendulum dowser and a spirit working on another spirit to say, it's okay to cross over.
Right.
And at one point, now this is done in front of an audience of about 30 people. And we had picked up a film crew out of New York was documenting Tombstone, and they bumped into us and they were following us around. So this whole thing is documented on tape.
Okay.
Digital. And at one moment, I was doing the pendulum work, and I don't remember this. They said it did a big circle in the air, and it dropped out of my hand. And I said, he's gone. And a wave of emotion, I mean, a physical wave of emotion swept through the whole audience. Yeah, I hugged Rhonda, and you could see people in the audience were some were weeping. A lot of them were just, oh my God, that. And my friend Brian, who is a skeptic, was going, oh, my allergies are acting up. His allergies decided to act up at that particular moment.
Of course.
It was the most emotional experience I've ever had. And it wasn't just me. I mean, everybody felt it in that whole room. It was so powerful. The release of that spirit, knowing that he could go across and he'd be okay. And and it's fascinating that his brother, the victim,
showed up.
Yeah.
And so, how did you become aware that his brother was there?
We felt another spirit, and I basically asked, "Is there another spirit here?" And I got a yes on the pendulum. And I said, "Did you know this individual?" Got a yes. "Are you the murder victim?" I got a yes. "So you're his brother?" Yes. "Are you here to help him cross over?" Yes. So again, process of elimination.
Right.
It was intense. It was incredible. I couldn't even, I wanted to tell my wife about it. I couldn't even talk about it for 3 days. I would start tearing up. It was that emotion.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, you can't fake that. I mean, you can't. It's real.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And you were there, and, you're in the energy. And when you're in the energy, you just know there's something that lets you know there's like this immediate, you can't second guess your own outcome even.
It's undeniable. I mean, you feel it, and it's not like an emotion that you worked up to in a great speech or something, or like a tent revival or something where you worked up and you worked up and you worked up and you worked up. I mean, it's like, bam, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't
And
fake.
and then you know what that emotion is all about too. The emotion is almost like a grace to let you, to give you the confirmation of whatever you experience too, right?
Yeah, well, George and I had an experience with our other dowser and our other medium, and the feeling we got at that time expressed perfectly by the medium was, I'm feeling mother love.
Oh,
Yeah, and that episode is in the book, and you'll read, Dan goes, "Oh, I'm tearing up. That's so powerful."
absolutely.
Yeah, what precipitated that was me, Dan, and the other dowser and his wife, who was a medium. We were in Lakewood Park in Bossier City, Louisiana, where I had taken a number of interesting photographs over the course of the months. And we were having a session specifically to communicate with ET, the lead spirit, if you will, and whatever's going on with Lindsay. And we got a great deal of information from ET. And I asked ET, would it be possible for him to present himself or itself or herself to us in some way that Lauren, the medium, might get an appreciation of identity or something like that. And ET said, okay, you asked for it and here it is. And Dan, you can pick that up.
No, it was just undeniable, and instantaneous. You get that kind of emotion.
Right.
You know it's real, and you know it's coming from the source that you are addressing.
Right. And so it was an avalanche of emotion that you experienced then in that moment when you asked for it.
And that one, it was unlike the one in Tombstone, which was instantaneous and powerful. This was just almost, well, it was mother love. It was an embrace. There was a nice,
Right.
smooth, slow embrace. And Lauren felt it more than I did, but I felt it. I felt it in my heart.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Has ever you've asked for something auditorily and you've been given something visually?
I've got another story for you. Hey, George, you know where I'm going. Yeah, I did. A good friend of ours brought me up to Texarkana, Texas, and Arkansas, and he said, "I've been having dreams about my grandfather. Can we investigate that? There's something going on here." I said, "Okay, we'll do that." So his family's been there since the 1830s, and they have a small family graveyard out way out in the wilderness, and it's well maintained. It's fenced in, and the people keep it up. It's the grass is mowed and the graves are tended. So we went out there to talk to Grandpa. And I had been teaching my friend pendulum dowsing, and so he had a pendulum. And the usual process, kind of walked around, familiarized ourselves with the place, and then I sat down in his family's part of the little cemetery, and I said I found a comfortable place in the shade, turned on my recorder, which I always do, not so much to catch EVPs, which I hope to do, but to record the session precisely so I can transcribe it, and when I print it in a book or something, it's exactly right. So
And it's just an ordinary everyday recorder, right?
Yeah. In fact, if your audience is interested, the cheaper the recorder, the better, because the more expensive recorders you get have buffers and audio enhancers. So a lot of that can cut out an EVP. So actually, the cheaper microphones work better because they don't filter out potential EVPs. So anyway, I'm sitting down there. My friend's puttering around. He finally comes over, and this is recorded now. I said, where have you been? He said, I lost my pendulum. I said, oh my God. He said, yeah, I cannot find my pendulum. I turn off the recorder. We go searching for his pendulum. We can't find it.
Right.
Okay, we'll come back. We'll do the session with my recorder, my pendulum. And we did a session, found out that his grandfather had been visiting him in his dreams. They were, the spirits of the family were concerned that the county was going to move in and move the graveyard, basically, eminent domain. And my friend was a very powerful landowner at the time. He could be able to do something about that. That's why they were visiting him. But I went back, I don't know, a week or so later, I'm playing back the session, typing out the transcript. And I listened to the very front end where my friend comes up and he goes, I lost my pendulum. And there's a distinct male voice that goes, it's by the truck. And then I go, you lost your pendulum. The voice comes back, it's by the truck.
Wow.
Neither one of us heard that when we were there, but it is plain as day on the
On the
recording.
audio.
So the spirit was there and was, by the tone of his voice, was a little bit frustrated. We couldn't hear him, but he was
Right.
trying to tell us where the pendulum was. So,
That's funny.
yeah, but
That's
it's a good example of how they interact. You know, it's not.
no, yeah. It's always in symbolism, and it's always in a way that you'd expect them to if you know them, right?
Right. It's a if you get away from I'm talking to ghosts, it's a conversation with someone that someone just happens to be not physically present.
Right.
And if you can get into that mindset, the conversation becomes very easy.
Yeah.
George became very adept at it like that. He's better at it than I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm something
Yeah.
of a cold fish.
So, okay, so talk to me a little bit about when you go to a site that is an individual site, like a building or someone's home versus a cemetery. Like I went to a spirit watch at a cemetery once, and there was a whole bunch of people there, and there's the team that was there that was guiding all of us that were interested in experiencing spirit communication at this cemetery. But how is it different? I realize that at a cemetery there's a lot of spirit there,
Not necessarily.
but
Yeah.
not necessarily. See,
No.
okay.
Yeah,
No,
what
but-
we,
Yeah,
what-
let me do this real quick. The way I've always approached it is you walk into a site and you ask for someone to show up. And generally, I don't ask, will Geronimo show up? Will Cleopatra show up? Will Abraham Lincoln show up?
Right.
Is someone here willing to speak with us? And then I say,
Right.
we're here to have a conversation. I'm a student. I want to learn whatever it is you can teach. I'm here with all courtesy and respect. It's my rule that if you're going into a haunted house, you're still going into somebody's house,
Right.
and you need to treat that person or those persons with respect and courtesy. And
Right.
then you make that statement, and you sit down and start asking questions. Didn't mean to interrupt, George, but I wanted to
No,
get
no.
that in there.
No, go ahead. Did you want to add something, George?
I was just going to include another element that was a part of this investigation that was not expected. Involves another very active participant in this research who is a spirit and wanted to be known. And during this time, it was my usual daily routine. I'm an early riser. I'm a morning person, so I would tend to get up around dawn. And my house is 1 mile from Mikewood Park. That's a big, huge park in Bossier City. It's adjacent to the end of the runway at Bartow Air Force Base. And I would walk down the park, walk around the circumference, which is 1 mile, and then come back to the house. So it's a good 3-mile walk. Great way to start the day. And one frosty morning, I was at Mikewood Park, and I stopped at the baseball field that had a heavy frost that was just glistening in the just risen sun. So I took a picture of it with my iPhone and posted it as a scene on this morning's stroll, and started getting a lot of comments on it. George, that's a picture. It's real nice and sparkly, but what's with the blue tennis ball? What? So I went back and looked at the picture, and well, sure enough, hovering above the ball field is a dark blue sphere orb, and okay, I hadn't seen that. I chalked it up as a lens flare since the sun was up. Okay, maybe somehow, caught a ray and did it. But in subsequent days, I would make the same, and I had an idea, well, let me just go to that same spot and let me recreate that photograph. And I'm looking around and I don't see anything, but I hold the camera up just as I did previously, click, okay, fine. And well, sure enough, there's another orb in a different position. And this went on for several days. And I had maybe a half a dozen photographs, all in the early morning from that same location, the same frame of various orbs. And it got my attention. So I sent all these pictures out to Arizona to Dan and said, look, take your pendulum, please. See if you can get some information on this, because it's something's trying to get my attention. And what Dan came up with is that, yes, the orb is a spirit, and it's a spirit that's known to me, but not in this lifetime.
Right.
Oh, hello. Okay, I'm not really that versed on my previous incarnation. I'm more focused on this. I'm a full-time job at this. But I had an inkling to search for 19th century American actresses, stage actors. And I started perusing the internet, and one name kept showing up, Kate Bateman. So I'm a member of newspapers.com, so I got some real specific newspaper articles about Kate Bateman, very well-known actress, born into a theatrical family in Baltimore in 1841, and just performed as children. They were performing, she and her sisters were performing with P.T. Barnum. And I know that from a review in the New Orleans Times-Picayune in December of 1860, she was at the St. Charles Theater doing Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. She later married an Englishman, moved to England, and was very, very popular on the London stage for the latter decades of the 19th century. So check with Dan again. I think this may be the spirit of an actress, Dan, but Kate Bateman, Dan. I don't know. What do you?
Right.
Well, that's what I'm showing. And I set up at a meeting with Colleen Laborde, one of our experiential mediums, and I need to see what impressions you have of this Kate Bateman, if in fact I'm creating this out of my own fantasy or what. And no, Kate is very much there. And Colleen was able to glean from Kate much of her personality in that particular lifetime. And more importantly, we got information that, well, the chapter in the book, it's called The Stage Manager.
Right.
And if you're familiar with theatrical terms, that's the person who runs the show once it opens. The director's out of the picture, the stage manager. And Kate was the stage manager for this investigation. She put the idea in Lindsay. Well, she's very familiar with Lindsay's life. She put the idea in Lindsay, now's the time. She put the idea in Lindsay, called Jo Beth. So behind the scenes, Kate had been assisting the movement of this entire investigation, because it was almost uncanny how it just unfolded. The right people coming together at the right time, verifying and validating the information, remarkable conversations with E.T. and getting a lot of information about Lindsay's life growing up and her encounters from her aunt who lived next door on the property. It was just uncanny. And that was due to Kate Bateman.
Wow.
I was out taking a walk 2 days ago, and I still take the same picture. And well, there's her blue sparkly over there just saying hey. So we had a lot of people working with us on this investigation, many of which we could not see.
Right.
Yeah, at one point we were discussing writing the book, and George asked a serious question, but it was like, Dan, half our sources are dead people. Well, sources are sources. I mean,
Sources.
Yeah.
We list them, we call them as we see them, and we list our sources. We're reporters. We report exactly what we've got.
Right. And so you're saying in if I was to go to the footnotes of your book,
all the sources, it's like we recreate the situation. George and Dan walked up to the gravesite of W.D. Woodworth, or we went to the Spring Street Museum, or we went to XYZ place and met the spirit of W.D. or Sally Murph or whomever. It's all
Right.
in there.
Wow.
And in many instances, we would supply the actual transcript of the session just to give the reader an idea of how these conversations work, because
Take place. Yeah.
it's remarkable. It's fascinating.
Yeah, the interviews with W.D. Woodworth, again, make our point. We found his gravesite, his family's gravesite, But we talked to WD all over town, in different places. He would show up. I mean, he's quite a character. What that simply proves that he's not trapped at the gravesite. So you're not, ghosts aren't hanging around the gravesite. So
Right.
he came to us wherever we were at the time.
And
Right.
another reason for that, as we discovered, that W.D. Woodworth is now Joe Fertitta, Lindsay's current father.
All right.
So those three stayed together.
Right.
So
That's interesting. So I wonder if all families stay together. Does it vary, or?
Well, this
I
one
wouldn't
did
want to comment on
the
the big
previous
picture.
incarnation. I can't speak for beyond that.
Certainly in this instance, that appears to be a recurring pattern. Now,
Wow.
it may be restricted just to this particular family and this particular involvement with a certain experiment, or not experiment, project. I mean, we were staying focused on the Lindsay Higgins story. If we had followed all of the directions that showed up in this investigation, we would not be having this conversation, because a book wouldn't have been written yet.
Right. So does Lindsay feel a lot of relief now that you've done this investigation and that all these things have been corroborated? And how does she feel right now about all this?
Towards the end, once Lindsay realized that she had agreed to participate in this long-term project, her response was, well, if I agreed to do it, then I'm going to do it. But let me ask something. If we're going to continue this, let me not experience discomfort and pain anymore, because that was
Right.
associated with many instances, all, but historically, that's what was getting her attention, that and markings on her skin and such. And she got a response from ET that would be the case. And we learned that some of the entities working with her physically would be your classic little grays, and they had no inkling whatsoever of her having pain or discomfort. They just were oblivious.
Right.
So that may have been part of it. But Lindsay,
So has her
I'm going-
pain dissipated? Has her pain dissipated now?
that's right. Lindsay reported after the book was published. Just want to double check. Yes, she's still having occasional visitations. We like to use that word. Some of them are physical, and that's when you'll see a little mark on the skin, a little symbol or something, or it'll be astral to take place in a different realm. But she's reported no physical discomfort, certainly like it used to be. So
So
that
what
was-
is the purpose? What is the purpose of the physical discomfort that she's having?
we wouldn't know. We wouldn't know.
What about the symbols that are being carved into her or otherwise?
This is something that's pretty, I would say, fairly widespread in the literature, where
Right.
after an encounter, an individual will have maybe like a square or a triangle or a circle.
Or a
Usually it's a
triangle.
geometric
Yeah.
symbol. And Lindsay's had this several times when she doesn't recall the visitation, but she'll, whoa, what's that? And it fades after a few hours. It's just, we call it in the book, the calling card, just to let you know that we've been here.
Right. So it's basically a recording on the body of that visitation, basically.
That's the
It's
way
just-
we were
Just a note
interpreting.
that says, well, we have visited you. Like George said, we've been here. I don't see anything sinister about it.
Right.
Because the marks fade away. I think it's just a
Right.
note that, you have been visited again.
Right. It's just to let them know. So basically that implies that they're not going to have a memory of it. And this symbol lets them know that.
Apparently so.
Okay, fascinating. Any other stories you want to share with me? Any ones that stand out?
About halfway through the process, George the skeptic kind of kicked in. I mean, this is just unfolding too easily. I mean,
Right.
the information is just coming, pop, 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 and validation, verification. Here we've got the mediums coming and going. We've got another pendulum holder over there, and we're just able to it's rocking and rolling, and having extensive conversations with ET. And wait a minute, time out. I wonder if maybe on a subconscious level, maybe Dan and I are doing some sort of projection here.
Right.
That we may be influencing the investigation, like we would hope not to influence the spin of the pendulum. Okay.
Right.
So I was getting a little skeptical there and a little concerned about it. So one fine morning, actually the morning of December 28th, 2020, 7 a.m. This is before dawn. I'm, hello, okay. Go open up the blinds in the living room window and look out, and hovering above my neighbor's house across the street is at least a 20-foot diameter orange and yellow sphere. It's just hovering. It's not moving.
You say
it's not
20 feet?
20, easily 20 feet diameter.
Wow.
It's big. It was above the street light. The street light there has a light pollution bulb in it, so it cast a kind of a yellow orangish glow, fairly
Right.
similar to the sphere, except the sphere was a little more orangey. Could look in the background and see the first rays of light from the soon to rise sun. Studying, I mean, it's not going anywhere. I can look at this as long as I want. I noticed that the circumference is not a hard edge or a firm circumference. It's kind of glistening and kind of got a little movement to it. Kind of like a painter might do a little feathering with their brush, that kind of.
So did you take any pictures?
Well, that's the next question. George is studying this thing, and what did I do next? Step out on the front porch and look at it directly, grab my iPhone, get a camera, get a picture. No, I went and fed the back porch cats, made a cup of coffee, walked back by the window, and the sphere was gone, and pop, whoa, hello. Meditating and analyzing this moment that evening, because I understood what those people were talking about back in the 80s and 90s about something being very personal.
Right.
This was a declaration. A formal term came to me that it was a diplomatic reveal. Its purpose was to affirm that, hey, everything that's going on here is real and genuine.
Right.
Cool it with the doubts, press on.
Right.
And I also gleaned at that moment that I was given a little taste of the subtlety of communications with these beings. And that's why I never had the thought to step outside or take a picture. It just never entered my mind. I was allowed to study it from my house, but I could not go to it physically, and I could not take a picture of it. And that was just the way it was. So that explained, to me at least, why in many stories and accounts of various encounters where the person reacts in a way differently from what they would expect or you would expect. Of course, I've been taking pictures of
Well,
orbs and spirits.
I also feel there's certain times when spirit wants to communicate with you, they won't let you record what it is that
Right.
they're
let me-
sharing with you.
Yeah, I've got speaking of photographs, similar thing happened to me. I'm pretty much a loner, so I'm out in the wilderness of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah quite a bit by myself. And this addresses also the personal angle of the UFO experience. But I was camping out on above the Navajo reservation up in southern Utah. Now where I was camping was 30, 40 miles from the nearest town, which was over the horizon, looking out over the reservation. And the area where I was overlooking, it's completely empty. It's pure desert. And there are no towns, there's no isolated houses, no farms, no roads, no street lights, just pure desert. And I'm looking down on this it's gorgeous area, but it's pure desert. So I do go through the thing. I use a technique that I got from Stephen Greer, Dr. Greer, where I meditate on making contact, take my time, send out telepathic friendship messages, basically, and then wait for something to happen. I did that night, and nothing happened. So I finally said, well, now I go to sleep. So I'll crawl into my cot, probably around 11 o'clock, go to sleep. I remember looking at my watch because I woke up, just bang, I'm wide awake. And I'm not a wide awake person. I mean, I'm not a morning person, but I was wide awake, and I sat up in my cot, and I looked, and there was a golden orb hanging over the reservation, about the size of the full moon. And I had watched the moon go down earlier before I went to bed, so it wasn't the full moon, but it was that size and that shape, just a yellow golden globe hanging out there. So I watched it, got out of my sleeping bags, threw on a little bit warmer clothing, watched it some more, walked around to the side of my truck, watched it some more. It just hung there. It wasn't moving. It wasn't rotating. It was just a globe hanging there, this enormous globe. And the minute I thought, well, I'm going to take a picture, bam, it was gone. It didn't fly away. It didn't fade away. But the moment I thought that and reached for my camera, it's gone.
Yeah.
I think it was one of those, you can look, but you can't touch.
Yeah. And there are times when you can touch and you can record, but there are other times when you absolutely can't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's my guess. It's purely my guess, but I think the show was for George and myself, and this is just my opinion. It was just like, okay, boys, you're on the right track. Keep it up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I get that.
Like in some of the photographs that I continue to take, okay, I still take my walks in the morning, sometimes in the afternoons, and I'm going to stop at that same position, frame up the exact same frame from the original picture, and I don't see anything. I mean, there's nothing visual, but I'll go ahead and take the picture, and not all the time, but often, the picture will have in it objects in the sky that are of various shapes, often very dark. Sometimes they're glistening, but what they are, I don't know. I don't see them, but the camera again records them, kind of like it does with the orbs. Mm-hmm. So I'll go along with Dan's interpretation that we continue to get these little strokes that, okay, keep going. It's all right. You got something going on here. Let's follow through with it. And this is in reference to, of course, the next book that we're currently researching, Paranormal Pendulum Book 4. So the adventure continues.
That's exciting. So this contributor you're calling ET,
mm-hmm.
How did you distinguish this being as ET versus spirit versus deceased individual? Like, how did you come to that conclusion?
Well, Dan and I had a session in Arizona out at the Goldwater Lake, as a matter of fact, early morning. And that's when we wanted to find out if, in fact, we could have direct communication with the ET most closely involved with Lindsay's case. And we got a very clear yes, be happy to do so. And a little bit later on, various information from ET, had us another session with Colleen, the medium, and asked if ET would present himself for Colleen so I could get her impressions of what we're dealing with. And it was Colleen's impressions that basically said, we're dealing with a very highly evolved soul of such development that doesn't have to have any particular form, can travel pretty much anywhere in the universe just by wanting to be there.
Right.
Could take on a physical form if needed to be in order to be seen by us. And that was described as what we would call in the literature a Nordic. It was that kind of physical description. But that's not the way, of course, he presents. But it was Colleen who was really picking up that this is not an extraterrestrial per se. This is just a highly evolved spirit who's very interested in the planet Earth, and in some form or fashion is directing this, whatever it is that's going on with Lindsay. And that's where we kind of got away from, we're dealing with aliens from another solar system, another planet or something. That really, in fact, we're dealing with souls.
Right.
Like ourselves, in that sense that we just happen to be in a very dense environment here, and we have to be physical in order to experience, but that's just a tiny, tiny slice of it. And these other spirits are just so much grander in their expression of life. And that was kind of the way that ET came across, and we wanted to double check that. And that's what we've already discussed when
That's the mother love.
yeah, the mother love, and that's when the other medium
Yeah.
had her impression of ET. So they were very complimentary.
Huh. So,
Yeah, it's very complex. Again, you know,
it's
we
fascinating.
started
It's
out with a basic abduction, and then we moved into some very complex and very very fascinating aspects of this case.
Mhm.
We don't claim to understand every bit of it either. We're still researching.
Yeah, and I think our contribution would be just an awareness that there's more to the story.
There you go.
That this whole thing, this whole arena that we narrowly defined as ufology or alien interactions, is just the itsy bitsy part of something that is just vast.
Well, the fact that that whoever it was assigned Lindsay a project, and that she was the only one instrumental in bringing humanity to a higher level of awareness or openness, that's pretty fascinating. Like,
Well, yeah, one, I need to toss this in real quick. I think there are probably hundreds of thousands of Lindsays out there.
Oh yeah,
I don't think she's
absolutely.
the only one.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And but what part do each of these play in this project is the question, and why are certain ones singled out versus another?
No, I think if you remember the movie Contact, there's a great conversation between the Jodie Foster character and the evolved spirit who's in her father's form, and she asks, you know, why do we do it this way? And her nickname was Sparks, and he says, "Small steps, Sparks, small steps."
Right.
And I think, you know, this process requires small steps, incremental steps over a long period of time. And I think that's why it's progressing this way.
And
Little bit at a time.
that's because of us, not them. You know, there's only
Right.
so much that we can process.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
And you know, there are a lot of us out there who just can't handle this. You run into that all the time, I'm sure. There are some who
Yeah.
are ready, open to not only, if not the experience, they're open to learning about the experience, and they're open-minded about it. And then you run into people who are just totally close to it. They won't go there or refuse to even think about it.
Right.
So, you know, it takes a long time to overcome that.
Right. And I guess the majority of humanity are nowhere near accepting any of this yet.
I would suspect that there are a lot more people who are on the cusp than you would imagine. I think that we haven't quite reached a
tipping point.
tilting point to get out of the negative dominance into a much higher frequency dominant, but it's real close, real
Yeah,
close.
we're rocking. Yeah. Well, I've exhausted my questions. Anything I might not have asked you that you guys want to share with me? I'm sure there's lots, but
yeah,
maybe we need a part 2.
Well, yeah, I would say just as far as the pendulum dowsing is concerned, if you're interested in that, it's extremely easy to pick up. To become adept at it, you have to practice and practice and practice. But if you're interested in that technique, you can pick it up in no time at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just stick with it and work it the way it's supposed to be worked.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And if anybody really wants to get a much broader appreciation of just how vast this whole subject is. The late Dolores Cannon, who was a past life researcher, wrote buku books, but in particular,
Yeah.
she wrote a 5-book series on the convoluted universe,
Yeah.
which is her findings of individuals who had experiences not only in past lives, but past lives on other planets, other life forms. And it's if you would like to have your consciousness expanded, recommended reading.
Yeah, absolutely. That's quite the compendium of literature.
That would be, of course, after you bought Paranormal Pendulum.
Oh,
3.
yeah.
The must-read book on the subject of it.
I'll definitely encourage our viewers to get the book. What I'll do is put the link in the video once it's
Thank you.
edited, so everyone will be able to access it. And thank you so much, both of you,
Well,
George.
thank you.
Oh, thank you. This is good fun.
It was good fun, and hopefully we can do it again. And since your investigation is continuing on, Lindsay, maybe you can give us an update at some point.
Anytime. Be
Sure.
glad to.
It was awesome meeting you both. I'm
Likewise.
going to stop the recording now. Thank
Okay.
you both very much.
Thank you.
Hey,